welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and welcome to day 3 of the 12 days of Christmas. So today we're talking about my classics TBR, which is one of my favorite videos every single year. I just love classics, as you probably know. And I have this dilemma every year of how many books I should put on this list. I'm always like, yeah, I think it should be 12. I thought about doing 22 books last year and I was thinking about doing 23 books this year, but I feel like that doesn't leave me open enough to be able to jump into books and readathons and read-alongs that I find out are happening later. So I have a collection of books here that I'm going to share, and I decided to do something a little bit different this year. So a lot of times when I pick classics for my classic TBR, I pick books that I'm really excited about or take place in a time period that I really love. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have no regrets for having done that. But I noticed last year that most of my books on my classics TBR were either Victorian literature or Russian books. So I thought that I kind of wanted to branch out in 2023 and read a bit more diversely. So a lot of the books on this TBR are in fact translated classics. So I'm calling this Around the World with Classics because it just sounds fun. So I will admit that there are quite a few books on this stack that are European. It was a lot easier for me to find books that were European classics, particularly because I did want to read a lot of the stuff that was already on my shelf that I had already purchased. Some continents were more easily found than others. Surprisingly, I have quite a few South American ones as well. I think I have 14 books on this list, which is a weird number, but I did the same thing last year. I think I actually had 13 on my list last year, but one of those was like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is 3 books. So technically this is less than last year. Some of these books, I tried to go with some that were more of a mix of shorter books and longer books. And there are definitely some humongous tomes on here, but then there are also some shorter ones as well. So I'm going to start out with Asia because the first book that is on this list is one that I'm afraid I'm going to forget because it's one that I'm planning to get and I do not have yet. In fact, it's the only book that is on this TBR that I purchased specifically for this TBR. The other ones was me shopping my shelves, which I'm really proud of myself for doing. Anyway, that book is from Korea and it is actually a nonfiction, which is different, I guess, because it's not really, does it count as classic literature when it's a nonfiction? But anyways, it's the memoirs of Lady Hyungyong. I may be butchering that pronunciation, so I'm really sorry. This takes place in, I believe, 16th or 17th century Korea, and it is a memoir of this woman who was part of the court in Korea. And so she's writing about her time there, and I think that maybe her husband also gets like assassinated or something like that, or someone in her family. So there's a lot of court politics and intrigue, and I'm really looking forward to reading this book. Christy from Christy Lewis Dostoevsky in Space actually really was interested in this book, and so I think we're going to be reading it together next year, and I'm so looking forward to it. My other Asian book is actually one that I'm really surprised that I haven't read. I have actually had this edition on my shelves for probably close to 2 years at this point, and that's the Arabian Nights. I love this edition. I think it's so pretty. I have never read even one story from the Arabian Nights, which is really surprising. I know about the story about like Sinbad the Sailor, and I'm sure that we're all familiar with some elements of Aladdin thanks to Disney, but I've never read any of it. So I'm excited to actually finally read this one, and I love fairy tales, so I think I'm really gonna enjoy it. Okay, moving on to South America. The first book that I have on here is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I love this cover, by the way. I think it's really pretty. I picked this up at a thrift store and I don't really know much about it. I think that there are some elements of magical realism and I'm not really sure if I'm going to like it because some people that I share very similar book tastes to actually hated it. So we'll see. This book is from Columbia. So that's really cool. I don't think I have ever read a book from Columbia before. So I'm really looking forward to giving this one a try. Next up from Argentina, we have Borges. I have never read any Borges, and I've wanted to for a really long time because I know both Noah from Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse and Una from the Codex Cantina really love them some Borges, and I've enjoyed a lot of their discussions and talking about him. I believe Borges was mostly a short story writer. I could be wrong about that. Maybe he's written some other types of things as well, but I think he's primarily known for his short stories, and one of his more famous collection is Fictiones, and I have Labyrinths, and I think that those are his two more well-known short story collections. I found this at a thrift store for like 75 cents, and I was so thrilled because I'd never seen a Borges at a thrift store. So I'm excited to read this one. I'm hoping that I'm smart enough to understand, but there's some of the short stories that are in there. Actually, as I'm flipping through, there are essays and parables, which is really interesting. So I'm looking forward to this one a lot. And my last South American book is from Brazil, and that is The Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas. And I am pumped to read this book. Like, I cannot wait. I'm so excited. I don't know that this is a super well-known classic, but I heard Murphy Napier talking about it, and she talked about how funny it is and has a lot of dry humor in it. So this is a man who is writing his life story, but he's already dead. So he has certain viewpoints that I'm sure he would not have had if he had written it while he was living it or experiencing those moments. And so there's a lot of like interjected humor, like breaking the fourth wall kind of a thing. And I'm really looking forward to reading this one. It sounds like it's very uniquely written. Next up, we have some African books. I have a couple that were on my shelves. So one is like, when you think of African classics, this is what everyone thinks of, and I think most people have read this book. That's Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and my husband actually read this book in college, but I have not read it. So this is a Nigerian book. I actually don't really know what it's about at all, but I've heard really wonderful things about it, and I'm excited to read it because I haven't read that much African literature, especially like older stuff, although this was written in 1959, so definition of older could vary from person to person, but it's, I think, much easier to find more modern works from African authors. So I'm really excited to read something that is older and will probably give me a very different perspective on whatever it is that's being written about. And my other African book is South African, and that's Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. So this is a book that takes place in South Africa during the apartheid, and so I think that it will probably be very hard-hitting and very sad. I've heard this title a lot, just randomly wherever, but I don't know if I've ever heard anyone actually talk about it, like anyone that I know talk about their experience reading it or what they thought of it. So I have zero expectations going into this book, but I'm very intrigued. Okay, so we're moving on to European books. I feel like these books are all super different from each other. The first one I have here is Italian, and that's The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. And this book is pretty big. This is one of the bigger ones on this list, I think. And this book, I think, follows like a monastery, and they're trying to solve some sort of mystery that's happening, but there's also a lot of like deep philosophical discussions that are happening at the same time, which kind of sounds like my jam, to be honest, because that's something that I love about Dostoevsky. Not necessarily the mystery part, but there's a lot of like drama and things that are happening and lots of plot things that are happening, but in addition, so many like really deep discussions that are happening at the same time. So I'm really, really excited to read this one. And it would not be a Tiffany TBR if I did not have a Russian book on here, but shockingly, it is not a Dostoevsky and it's not a Tolstoy. I asked you guys on Instagram to vote between Resurrection by Tolstoy or Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev, and Fathers and Sons won. So this is the Russian classic that I will be prioritizing next year. Will this be the only Russian classic I read? I highly doubt it. Actually, especially because I'm currently reading Demons by Dostoevsky, and that is extending from December into February. So there's already one other one. But I have not read anything by Turgenev ever, and I don't know anything about this book, but I do know that a lot of people who don't even like Russian literature like this book. So I have very, very high hopes. And also there was a lot of interaction between Turgenev and Dostoevsky. And so that's really interesting because there was a lot of things that they did not agree on in mindset and philosophy. So I'm really interested to give this book a try and kind of see what direction it goes in. Next up, we have a book from Spain, and this is another really big book on this list, Don Quixote. So I've had this book on my shelf for a while. It actually seems smaller to me just because these Macmillan edition books are short, but it's really thick. And I'm sure it's pretty tiny print. So this is really long. I think it's over 1,000 pages. So this is one of the longer ones. I've heard really good things about this though. I've heard a lot of people say that it doesn't feel as long and it's actually really funny. So this is another one of those books that I'm fairly hopeful about, even though it's big, so it's a little bit on the intimidating side for me, especially because I've never read anything by him. I also think that this is older than a lot of classics that I've read, if I'm remembering correctly. So that makes it a little intimidating for me as well, because I really don't know anything about the time period that it was written in, or a lot about Spanish history in general. So all those elements make it a little intimidating for me, but the fact that I've heard so many people read it and enjoy it and say that they laughed out loud gives me a lot of hope. Next up is a French book by an author that I have not yet read, and that's Père Goriot by Honoré de Balzac. How beautiful is this edition? Isn't it lovely? I got it at Half Price Books with Christmas money last year, and I just love it so much. I'm already planning on reading this with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and hilariously enough, she just posted her books that she's doing for the 1001 Countdown. This is one of the books, and she has the exact same edition of this book as I do, which is really, really funny. So I don't know anything about this book at all. One of my co-hosts from Rating Project Gutenberg, Kate from the Literary Apothecary, read this book for Rating Project Gutenberg and really enjoyed it. So I hope that I will too. Coming on the heels of that lovely, lovely edition, we have possibly the most hideous cover I've ever seen in my entire life. That's Demian by Hermann Hesse. This is a German book, and I have heard a couple of friends talking about this, friends who also really enjoy K-pop, because apparently BTS's Blood, Sweat, and Tears music video was very, very heavily inspired by this book. So my friend Christy has read this, and also Jennifer Brooks has read this, and they both thought it was like very interesting, very accessible, and had like very interesting conversations and things to say. So I'm pretty sure this is just kind of like sort of a coming of age story about this boy kind of being influenced by this boy Demian as he is growing up and kind of just awakening to a lot of things. And so that's kind of all that I know about it. So I'm really interested to read this and then kind of like look for the nuggets in the Blood, Sweat, and Tears music video. So those books are kind of like my main 12 books that are kind of different, kind of maybe a little bit out of my comfort zone. Not one of those authors is an author that I have read before. So that's really interesting. But since technically we're reading around the world, I can include 2 books from England, right? Is that okay? I guess it's okay. It's my TBR. So I have 2 books that I'm planning to read from England this year, and they are both Victorian books. I will probably read more Victorian books than this, and I actually have plans to read several books that are classics that are not on this TBR, but the first one of the 2 is Middlemarch by George Eliot. This is a chunker. This is one of those books that has intimidated me for a while because I have tried to read some of Eliot's longer books. I've read Silas Martyr several times and loved it, but I tried to read The Mill on the Floss and just like, it's not that I really disliked it, I just wasn't into it, and so I DNF'd it, and that was long before I was on BookTube. And just Middlemarch scares me more because it tends to be the book of hers that people give up on because they're not enjoying it. And I think it's kind of a little bit more like slice of life over a time period kind of a book. And so maybe there's not that much like exciting stuff that happens. I don't really know. But I am already planning to read this with Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads, and she is my scary classic buddy. We read War and Peace together earlier this year, and gosh, I would not have gotten through that book without Stephanie. So we're both thinking that Middlemarch is probably going to be an easier read because it's definitely a shorter read than War and Peace, but it is one that we're both kind of intimidated by. So we're gonna read it together, and that's instantly going to make it better. And then every year I usually will read 2 Dickens. Usually I will reread one and read a brand new one that I've not read before. And so this year, the one that I have not read before is Nicholas Nickleby. And I'm so excited to read this, especially because this is Dia from Novel Ideas' favorite Dickens, and she sent it to me for Christmas last year. And I had already made my Classics TBR, and I'd already put A Tale of Two Cities on there, and I was like, oh man. So I've been waiting to read this book, and I'm so excited to be reading Nicholas Nickleby this year. This is another one that's pretty chunky. I don't know exactly how long it is. 800-ish pages it looks like in this edition, so it's pretty long, but I love me some Dickens, so I'm not mad about that at all. I also usually have like a Jane Austen every year and a Thomas Hardy every year, but because I was trying to diversify my official TBR, I did not include any of those authors on this TBR, but I'm sure I will be reading something by each of them probably. But if there's one author that I read from every year that had to be on here, it's Charles Dickens. So there you have it. There is my Classics TBR for 2023. I'm really excited about how different it is because I think it's going to push me to read some books that maybe I wouldn't have read otherwise. I'm really interested to see what I think of this, and I'm really excited to read more diversely in the classic world this year and kind of make more of an effort to do that. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. Have you read any of these books? And if so, which ones? Hopefully you liked them and hopefully I will too. But yeah, I would love to hear also if there are any classics that you are prioritizing in 2023, or if there's any of these that maybe you would like to buddy read with me. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.